You know what society does to people who prefer solitude? They don't just leave them alone. They send in the fixers, the concern trollers, the people who've decided your peace is their problem to solve. Picture this. You've declined 3 weekend invitations in a row because you genuinely prefer your own company. You're not depressed, not hiding, not broken, just content. And suddenly, the messages shift. Hey, just checking in. Are you okay? We're worried about you. Or watch what happens at work. You eat lunch alone, by choice, reading or thinking, or just existing peacefully. Within weeks, someone from HR suggests you might benefit from connecting more with the team. Your performance is fine, your work is solid, but your solitude has become a workplace concern. Here's another one. Family gatherings where you're perfectly pleasant but leave after an hour because you've had enough socializing. Next thing you know, your aunt is texting your mom about how you seem withdrawn. Your cousin is suggesting maybe you should talk to someone. Your contentment reads as crisis to them. Then there's the friend who keeps inviting you to group events, even after you've politely declined a dozen times. But the invitations now come with commentary. I know you like to isolate, but I'm worried you're becoming a hermit. This isn't healthy. Notice the pattern? You're doing nothing wrong. You're harming no one. You're content, functional, clear about your preferences, but your solitude triggers something in them that transforms into intervention. Because here's what nobody tells you. Society doesn't just dislike loners, it actively recruits people to fix them. And these fixers come in specific types, each with their own method of disguising control as concern. The first type is the persistent inviter. They refuse to accept that you mean what you say. Every declined invitation is treated as a cry for help rather than a clear boundary. They frame their refusal to hear no as loyalty, as caring too much to give up on you. But here's what's actually happening. They're announcing that your stated preferences don't matter as much as their interpretation of what you need. Your "no thanks, I'm good" becomes evidence of your dysfunction rather than a legitimate choice. They've decided you don't know your own mind. The persistent inviter operates on a specific belief that isolation is always involuntary. They cannot conceive that someone might genuinely prefer solitude, so they reframe your every decline as resistance they need to overcome. Your clarity becomes their mission. And here's where it gets darker. They recruit others. Your preference for solitude becomes a group concern. Suddenly, you're not just declining one person's invitation, you're the subject of group chats about your well-being. Your boundary becomes their collective project. The second type is the armchair diagnostician. This person has decided your preference for solitude is a symptom of something deeper: depression, trauma, social anxiety, attachment issues. They've diagnosed you without your consent and definitely without qualifications. They pepper conversations with psychology terminology they half understand. You know, isolation is a classic sign of depression. Have you considered that you might have avoidant attachment? Studies show that loneliness is as dangerous as smoking. They weaponize pop psychology to pathologize your peace. But notice what they're actually doing, reframing your choice as illness. Because if your solitude is pathology, their intervention becomes care rather than control. They're not disrespecting your boundaries, they're helping someone too sick to know they need help. It's concern trolling disguised as mental health awareness. The third type is the Social Scorekeeping Comparer. This person measures connection quantitatively and finds you lacking. They count your social media posts, track how often you attend events, notice when you haven't texted the group chat in a week. Your solitude becomes data they're collecting as evidence. They make comments disguised as observations. You haven't posted anything in months. When's the last time you came out with us? You're always so busy. But they're not actually asking questions, they're presenting evidence of your social failure, hoping shame will change you.
Here's what makes this type insidious. They frame social engagement as moral virtue. The more connected you are, the better person you are. The more you show up, the more you care. Your preference for solitude becomes proof of selfishness, of not valuing the relationship, of choosing yourself over community. And they'll make sure you feel that judgment. The fourth type is the Lifestyle Evangelist. This person has built their entire identity around social connection and cannot tolerate the existence of an alternative that works. Your contentment in solitude is a threat to the story they tell themselves about human needs. They give unsolicited advice constantly. You just need to put yourself out there more. Have you tried joining clubs? Maybe you're not giving people a chance. They cannot accept that you're not seeking what they're selling. Your satisfaction without their lifestyle feels like a personal attack. The fifth type might be the most dangerous, the boundary violator who claims love. This person, often family, sometimes a close friend, refuses to respect your limits specifically because they love you. They show up unannounced because I was worried and wanted to check on you. They demand explanations for your choices because I care too much to just let this go. They guilt trip you for needing space because family doesn't shut each other out. They call repeatedly when you've asked for time alone because what if something's wrong and you need me? They recruit other family members to their concern because we all love you and we're all worried. Every single violation of your clearly stated boundaries gets wrapped in the language of devotion. And the cruelest part, they genuinely believe it. They've convinced themselves that love justifies the invasion, that care excuses the control, that their emotional discomfort with your choices trumps your right to make them. And they frame every violation as proof of how much they care. I was worried about you, so I came over, even though you've explicitly asked them to call first. I love you too much to let you isolate, even though you've explained repeatedly that you're not isolating, you're choosing solitude. Real friends don't give up on each other, even though respecting someone's boundaries isn't giving up, it's basic respect. They've made your boundary setting into abandonment. Your need for solitude becomes rejection of them specifically. Your preference for limited contact becomes evidence you don't love them enough. And suddenly, you're in this impossible position where maintaining your boundaries requires you to constantly defend against accusations of not caring, of being cold, of choosing yourself over the relationship. They've weaponized love language so effectively that your self-protection looks like selfishness. Your clarity about your needs looks like cruelty, and their boundary violations look like the only reasonable response to someone they love who's clearly struggling. This is perhaps the cruelest disguise because it weaponizes love language to justify control. How do you defend yourself against someone who claims they're only persistent because they care? How do you maintain boundaries with someone who treats every boundary as evidence you don't love them back? How do you explain that love doesn't actually require access, that care doesn't justify invasion, that their emotional discomfort with your choices doesn't constitute an emergency on your part? You can't, because they've set up a framework where your boundary maintenance is the problem, not their boundary violation, where your need for space is concerning, not their refusal to give it, where your repeated explanations are symptoms of you being defensive, not evidence of them being intrusive. And the harder you try to maintain your limits, the more worried they become. which justifies even more intervention, which requires even firmer boundaries, which creates even more concern. It's a loop designed to make your self-protection look like the dysfunction requiring their love-justified control. Here's what all 5 types share. They've decided your internal experience doesn't matter as much as their interpretation of it. Your clearly stated preferences get overridden by their concern. Your peace gets reframed as pathology. Your boundaries get violated in the name of care. The persistent inviter hears your no and decides it means save me. The armchair diagnostician observes your contentment and diagnoses dysfunction. The social scorekeeper tracks your absence and calculates failure. The lifestyle evangelist witnesses your alternative working and cannot tolerate the threat. The boundary violator experiences your limits and reframes them as rejection requiring love-based intervention. 5 different approaches, 1 shared belief. You don't know what you need as well as they know what you need. Your self-knowledge matters less than their interpretation. Your stated preferences matter less than their comfort with those preferences. And your repeated insistence that you're fine gets treated as further evidence of how not fine you actually are.
And here's what they'll never admit. Their intervention isn't about your well-being. It's about their comfort. Your contentment in solitude threatens the social contract they depend on. If you can be happy alone, what does that say about all the emotional labor they're performing in their connections? If you can find peace without constant social engagement, what does that say about the effort they're putting into maintaining relationships that exhaust them? If you can be whole without checking every social box they've been taught is mandatory, what does that say about all the times they've compromised their own needs to meet those expectations? Your peaceful existence asks questions they don't want to answer. It suggests that maybe the way they're living isn't actually necessary, that maybe they're choosing exhaustion over examining alternatives, that maybe the social contract they've organized their entire life around is optional, not universal. And that possibility is terrifying. So they intervene, not to help you, but to eliminate the question your existence poses. If they can fix you, they don't have to examine themselves. Because society has built entire structures around the idea that humans need constant social engagement to be healthy. And anyone who contradicts this narrative by being alone and content becomes a problem that needs solving. Not because they're actually suffering, but because their existence questions the premise. The premise that connection is always good, that more social engagement is always better, that solitude is acceptable only when temporary and involuntary, something to be fixed as quickly as possible, that a person who chooses aloneness and maintains that choice must be damaged in some way that prevents them from wanting what everyone naturally wants. These aren't just beliefs, they're the foundation of how society organizes human value. Your worth gets measured partly by your connections. Your health gets assessed partly by your social engagement. Your success gets evaluated partly by your network. And when you opt out of that measurement system entirely by being content in solitude, you're not just making a personal choice, you're challenging the entire framework. You're suggesting the measurement system itself might be flawed. Your peaceful solitude becomes an accusation they never asked for. It suggests that maybe all that forced socializing isn't actually necessary. Maybe those exhausting group dynamics aren't the only path to fulfillment. Maybe connection can be chosen rather than compulsory. Maybe quality matters more than quantity. Maybe depth matters more than breadth. Maybe authentic solitude is healthier than performed connection. Maybe someone can build a rich, meaningful life without constantly being surrounded by people. Maybe the fear of being alone has driven more dysfunction than actual aloneness ever has. And that possibility terrifies them. Because if it's true,
If solitude can be genuinely fulfilling, if aloneness doesn't equal loneliness, if constant connection isn't actually required for human flourishing, then what have they been sacrificing themselves for? What has all that emotional labor been in service of? What does it mean that they've organized their entire existence around avoiding something that isn't actually the threat they believed it was? So they send in the fixers, the persistent inviters who won't hear no, the armchair diagnosticians who pathologize your peace, the social scorekeepers who collect evidence of your failure, the lifestyle evangelists who can't tolerate alternatives, the boundary violators who weaponize love. Each one convinced they're helping, each one absolutely certain their concern is genuine. And maybe it is genuine. Genuine concern can still be genuinely wrong. Genuine care can still be genuinely controlling. Genuine love can still be genuinely suffocating. The sincerity of their feelings doesn't make their intervention appropriate. The depth of their worry doesn't make your boundaries less valid. The fact that they really do believe you're struggling doesn't mean you actually are. Their interpretation of your life, no matter how well-intentioned, doesn't override your lived experience of it. And their inability to understand how you can be content alone doesn't make your contentment less real. It just makes their concern more about them than about you. Each one convinced they're helping. Each one absolutely certain their concern is genuine. And maybe it is genuine, but genuine concern that ignores your clearly stated needs and violates your explicitly set boundaries isn't care, it's control. And control doesn't become acceptable just because someone calls it love. Control doesn't become healthy just because someone frames it as worry. Control doesn't become appropriate just because someone insists they're only persistent because they care so much. The problem isn't the emotion behind the intervention. The problem is the intervention itself. The problem is the fundamental assumption that their discomfort with your choices constitutes a crisis requiring action, that your contentment requires their understanding to be valid, that your boundaries can be overridden if the reason is loving enough, that you need fixing just because they can't comprehend how you're not broken. Genuine concern would respect your stated needs even when it doesn't understand them. Genuine care would honor your boundaries even when it doesn't agree with them. Genuine love would trust you to know yourself even when your self-knowledge contradicts their interpretation. So if you're the person who prefers solitude, who's clear about your boundaries, who finds peace in your own company, know this. These 5 types will keep appearing in your life. They won't stop trying to fix what isn't broken. They won't suddenly understand that your choices are valid. The persistent inviter will keep sending those just checking in messages. The armchair diagnostician will keep dropping psychology terms into conversations about your well-being. The social scorekeeper will keep tracking your absence from events. The lifestyle evangelist will keep offering unsolicited advice about putting yourself out there. And the boundary violator will keep showing up unannounced, claiming love justifies the invasion. They'll rotate through your life in different forms, different people, same patterns. A new coworker who's concerned about your lunch habits, a distant relative who's suddenly worried about your social media presence, a neighbor who's decided your quiet evenings are a crisis requiring intervention. The faces change, but the fundamental refusal to accept your contentment remains constant. They'll find new angles, new justifications, new ways to frame their control as care.